Hello and welcome to the next edition of Describing. I'm this time going to describe Fallout 4. Specifically, the plot, particularly the plot and the choices and stuff. So just strap in. Want to know about Fallout 4's plot? Well, let me tell you something. So what happens in Fallout 4? Well, you get introduced to the Fallout world unlike anything we'd seen prior in the Fallout games. You see, you start out as a player character who you can choose the gender, race, whatever, a human character in the beginning of the game, and you're married, you have a wife or husband. So with your wife and kid, you also have a baby kid. His name's Sean. It's always Sean, by the way. There's no other names for the kid. So your kid's name is Sean, and Sean is just a little baby in the beginning, and you guys are before the bombs drop, and you're like, hold up a fucking second. I haven't seen Fallout 1, 2, 3, New Vegas. I haven't seen any of those. I don't know what the fuck is going on. So here, let me take a few steps back before we jump into Fallout 4's particular example of plot. So, in a world where the culture of the 1950s, like the aesthetic and honestly, I think aesthetic is the best word to describe how it is. It's like the aesthetic and kind of mindset of America from 1950s, from the 1950s, kind of stagnated, though technology and basically time continued forward with that culture. Though, so we had all these crazy inventions, nuclear war ends up happening between America and China, and there's this whole battle of Anchorage and stuff, but I won't get into the specifics. So in Fallout 4, like I mentioned, you're someone before this nuclear war happens, and essentially all the Fallout games take place in a post-nuclear war world where all of the landscape is just completely fucked by nuclear bombs. Mind you, it's 200 years after the war, give or take, 200 years after the bomb drop, so everything isn't completely irradiated, only somewhat in certain areas. But anyways, so your player character is before these bombs drop. That's when you kind of step into his shoes for Fallout 4. And once you step into his shoes, well, you get to talk to a Vault Tech guy, and he's like, hey, you're signed up for Vault Tech, and Vault Tech is this company that essentially has these vaults all over America, possibly elsewhere as well, and they have all these vaults that are essentially anti-nuclear war vaults. If a nuclear bomb goes off and you're in a vault, you should be okay. You should be all right, relatively speaking. Well, in the case of your character, you get frozen alive, along with pretty much everyone in your town who went into the vault. You get frozen alive, and then you wake up hundreds of years later, and here you are. And you're now in the Commonwealth. And in Fallout 4, I forgot to mention the detail of your son being kidnapped from your wife and or husband. Basically, the one that you aren't gets killed and your child taken from them, and you can see all of this from inside your cryotube. But if you weren't paying that much attention when it happens, for whatever reason, later in the storyline you get to relive that memory, but you get to be standing outside of the cryopod, and you get to see yourself freaking out about it and stuff. It's pretty good. It's pretty great. So anyways, so your guy is like, okay, well, I gotta go find my son Sean. And he's like, where is my son? And he's just like, where is Sean? Where is he? And your character probably needs to learn how to take a fucking chill pill. But your character basically goes on a hunt, and this is where Bethesda games get a little tricky with how do you describe the story of a Bethesda game, because this is where the player gets their agency. Okay, you're 100 plus years into the future after the bombs drop. You're in the post-apocalyptic commonwealth here. So now what? You were probably wondering, okay, well now what do we do? Well, hey, good question. Well, it's up to you, because in the Commonwealth, you can do whatever the fuck you want, kind of. Though let's just pretend you go with the way the game is kind of telling you to go, which is you go to Diamond City. You go to Diamond City, and when you go to Diamond City, along the way, before you get there, you're probably going to meet Preston Garvey and the remainder of what is known as the Minutemen. And the Minutemen are essentially a faction of people who are just like, yeah, we just like work together and we help each other when bad shit happens to each other, and that's pretty much it. That's just how it works. That's how we enforce peace in our version of the Commonwealth. And then there's the Brotherhood of Steel that you might have also came across, who is pretty much like these hyper-tech teched out people who kind of have a bit of an affinity for technology. You know, that you'll notice they're in power armor that's this insanely powerful armor compared to just your regular armor. So you'll notice they have that. They have flying vertibirds, laser weapons. You know, they're pretty decked out. And they're pretty, like, kind of U.S. military-ish in their sort of practices. They're very, you know, you're this rank, and this rank is what determines who you can boss around and all that. It's kind of like that. So it's a little, you know, that might not be your favorite cup of tea, but hey, you met them probably, and you may have helped them, and you may have already joined them, which comes into play in a little while. But you also may have joined the Minutemen, so you can, you know, you got your choices. But then another choice happens later. But anyways, so you go to Diamond City, right? You meet this girl named Piper. She's like, hey, I know you. I'm an investigative journalist. I kind of scare everyone by telling them about the Institute, but it's kind of the truth. So, hey, you know, what can you do? This truth is scary sometimes. And you're like, oh, cool, Piper. That's cool. You're a cool character. And I don't have much else to say about Piper because really she's not that involved with the plot in the grand scheme of things. She's just a good character. You should check out. You should talk to her because she's got some interesting development if you choose to make her your friend. Anyways, so you meet Piper. She gets you into the city. You get into the city. You look for a guy named Nick Valentine. You find out Nick Valentine has gone missing, and he's been missing for a little while. So you're like, okay, well, now what? So you're like, okay, I'm gonna pay a visit. You pay a visit to where he was last known to be seen, which is at this place, and he's in an underground vault. And there's this group of people who've got him captured. You pretty much just murder all of them. Your character pretty much just doesn't give a fuck. He'll just fucking shoot everybody. And that's what happens. You know, you murder the fuck out of all of them. You save Nick Valentine. He's like, oh, well, what can I do for you? And you're like, I need to find my son, Sean. Tell me where he is. Except maybe he's not exactly. Your character isn't freaking out that much. That's just me. But he's like, yeah, I need to find my son. He's like, oh, well, that kind of reminds me of this thing and all this. And then one thing leads to another, and you discover this guy named Kellog is the guy who was last seen with your son. You sneak into his house in Diamond City. You find out that he's working with the Institute. You hunt down Kellog. You murder his ass. You take the thing out of his brain. You go to this thing called the Memory Den, I think, in Good Neighbor. Also, check out this Hancock character, who's the mayor of Good Neighbor. Pretty cool character. Also, pretty interesting character. Check him out. You know, Nick Valentine also is an interesting character, by the way, because he's like a synth, but he's not. And you know, you can tell he's like a pretty human as fuck synth to the point where it's like, holy shit, this guy feels more human than half the characters in this game. But let's not get into that. That's not this video, but anyways, so you go to the Memory Den, you read memories of Kellog, you go into the memories of Kellog, and right, like, remember what I mentioned earlier, you would be now standing outside of the cryopod? Well, it turns out Kellogg's the one who murdered your wife and took your son. He gave your son to the Institute, and what the Institute is essentially a group of scientists living underground who are essentially a part of the remnants of the old MIT Institute in Boston. You find out through Kellogg that you have to teleport to the Institute, so you're like, fuck, now what do we do? And you're like, okay, well, now we need to kill a courser. So what you end up doing is you find out there's a guy named Virgil, who's this super mutant guy who turns out he was an old scientist for the Institute, and he hides himself in the glowing sea. So you hunt him down, you find him, and he's like, hey, you know, I've got this serum in my lab. If you find it for me, I will help you get into the Institute. And you're like, okay, that sounds good. And it turns out it's in the Institute, so he kind of, it's kind of in his best interest to help you, I guess. So anyways, he tells you have to track down a Courser using your Pip-Boy radio, so you do that, you kill the Courser, you take the Courser chip. Actually, wait, there's one other detail. You have to find the Railroad, which is another faction of people who are also hiding underground, but what they do is they try to liberate synths from the Institute, who essentially tries to hunt down their synths and collect them if they try to escape. You bring it to whatever faction you decided to side with, they decode it for you, and which you now have to construct your own teleporter using the settlement feature. Also, settlement crafting is a little annoying just for the fact that the game kind of forces you to do this. It's just a little annoying. That's all I'm gonna say. It's not the worst thing in the world, but god damn it, guys. So you build the teleporter, and you use the decoded Courser chip to teleport you into the Institute, in which you do, and you're probably like, wait, hang on a second, where is my son Sean? Where is Sean? You're probably wondering that, and you're like, all right, so let's talk about that. You get into the Institute, turns out Sean is now the leader of the Institute, and he's also a 60-year-old man, but that doesn't stop him from building a robot of his child self, so that you meet the child self robot first and think you found your son, and then he's a fucking robot, and it's like, what the fuck was the point of that? All it did was instill my character with a sense that he found his actual kid, and then all he finds is his actual kid, but he's an old man, and he's fucking annoying, and he's a little cunt. He's a piece of shit, dude. Sean is a piece of shit. So let me just explain why for a second. So you're like, okay, well, he offers to like work with you, and he kind of acknowledges that your character's pretty goddamn impressive because he managed to get to the Institute and all this, kill a Courser, all this other stuff that is deemed impressive. So he's like, okay, damn, Dad, we could work together. And then the one time I don't do exactly what he asks of me, which is to round up the synths and take them back to the Institute, I decided to let them go free. And he meets you on top of the MIT building in the wasteland, and he's just like super salty with you, and he's like, I can't have this, father. And it's just like, okay, you lose a few synths. Fuck you, dude. All right, fuck you. It's like, how about we continue working together because we're father and son, but I kind of like also have my own terms to, how come I don't get a fucking say in how shit should go? Oh no, because you're just my slave follower who does exactly what I tell him. That's why, because I'm an asshole, and your entire quest to find me wasn't even worth your fucking time. You were better off being like a normal Fallout 4 player and just ignoring the main quest for fucking 20 hours and then being like, all right, I guess I'll go to Diamond City and talk to the Nick Valentine Detective Agency girl, and she'll fucking point me in the right direction, and we'll get this fucking main quest started. Fuck me. But anyways, so what I ended up doing is my very first playthrough of Fallout 4, I just fucking killed him with a combat shotgun right to his face. But in my second playthrough, in my VR playthrough, to be honest, the Brotherhood of Steel is who I sided with, and they wanted to just nuke the whole goddamn facility from the inside out, and they wanted to build a giant robot. So I was like, you know what, that sounds pretty cool. Let's build a fucking giant robot and take out the Institute. But also, by the way, when you meet with your father on the rooftop, he does like ban you from being in the Institute again, and that's why when I was siding with the Brotherhood, I was just like, yeah, no, let's blow him up. Let's just blow the whole fucking thing up. So anyways, you meet him, so you end up building Liberty Prime for the Brotherhood of Steel, and he's just like, destroy all communists. And it's pretty fucking awesome, to be honest. But anyways, so he ends up blowing a hole into the ground large enough to actually get into the Institute. So you do it, that's what happens. You get the hole in the ground that's large enough to break into the Institute, and that's all well and good and dandy. And you end up breaking through, you end up getting into the Institute, and you meet your son one last time, and he's sick, and he's on a deathbed, and he's just like, you ruined everything. And then I'm just like, Sean, I don't fucking like you, Sean. And he's just kind of like, Just like that. That's exactly how he expressed himself. So anyways, yeah, your son is sick on his deathbed. And then I'm like, son, I'm gonna nuke this whole goddamn place, and I'm just gonna blow it sky high. But you can help me, because I was a charismatic guy, so I was able to convince my son to give me the access code for the thing to get to the core where I needed to blow up with the nuke. All right. I mean, for one, I think I've gone too far as like, describing it. As if you're a newcomer, and I just have already told you the entire plot line of Fallout 4, basically. But if you don't care and you don't want to play the game, or you just, you just want to hear me talk about it, well, then hey, you found the right place. So you blow it sky high, and then you get your ending, and that's pretty much it. That's pretty much Fallout 4's main quest in the nutshell. There's a lot of side stuff to do, and the gameplay itself lends itself well for just random exploration. It's honestly at its strongest when you're just wandering, I find, which is unfortunate for me, because I'm kind of the kind of player for Fallout where I find the quest content the most interesting. I'm pretty much there just to see the inhabitants of the post-apocalyptic world. I'm a little less interested in the world itself. It's not exactly a blast to explore. It's cool, and it's, if that's the kind of setting that's your aesthetic, then by all means. But for me, if I like exploring, like a pretty world, or a world that has some mystique to it, not just like a much more dried up, destroyed version of ours. And our own real world is kind of depressing enough as it is, and Fallout 4 is just like, all the Fallouts are just kind of like, yeah, here's an even more depressing look at how it could be, and it's like, oh, well, let's hope we don't ever do nuclear war, or else we're going to live in this universe. But hey, that's Fallout 4 for you. I don't have that much more to say, honestly. I think I described it pretty accurately, but if I didn't, and if I missed some details that you think were essential to this plot description, let me fucking know, all right? And hey, play the game if you want to find out some, because honestly, I'm gonna just throw this out there. I think the best thing in Fallout 4 is the characters, which maybe to some isn't saying a lot, but for me it is, because I think that they did a pretty good job with their way characters interact with you. The fact that your actions can piss them off and stuff is cool. Not a lot of Bethesda games before this, pretty much none of the other ones have done this really before that. I think so, at least. But anyways, right, I'm just rambling. If you want to check out more description videos, you can go and click on the screen here. There should be a thumbnail for the Mario one, where I describe one of the most basic premises in all of video games of Super Mario, but I also get really in-depth into the timeline and lore. To some extent, you might not be entirely satiated, but then there's also the Pokemon description video, where I sort of describe the fundamental basics of Pokemon. I don't really go into any particular one story of Pokemon, but I kind of just describe how the universe of Pokemon is, and stuff like that. So if you want to check those out, you could go do that now. If you want to do social media, there's the social media there. You can click on that, and there's also my editor, who I want to say a big thank you for being a great editor for me, which is, an awesome thing for you to do, and I hope you enjoy making. Thank you for tolerating my fucking descriptive ramblings. You check him out, and thank you guys so much for watching. Bye!